God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Len Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. Well, welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. I'm here with my good friend Susan Gibson. And Susan is the founder and CEO of Vivolor Therapeutics. And we'll get to that in a second, Susan. But why don't you start with just telling us a little bit about yourself and your upbringing, because you've got a multifaceted background. It'd be great just to hear some of that.
I do, and that, of course, plays into what I'm currently doing. So I've been a Christian since my youth. I knew the Lord really well when I was 6 years old, grew up in a Christian family, and became more spirit-filled later in my Christian walk. But I have come to realize that my passion has always been healing. And my father is a doctor twice, so a very kind of performance-oriented family. My mother was a housewife and stayed home, and I always considered her to be my best friend because she was the person I talked to about everything. And I've done tons of inner healing myself and taken every kind of training I can find to take in healing prayer to help others. And I'm executive director of House of Hope Healing Ministry right now, and involved in kind of every different kind of Christian program that I can. I'm always interested in growing and learning. And of course, I was part of the very first REAP trip back when it was called Equip, the very first trip to South Africa, which was so through REAP and a number of other organizations that I've been involved in, I have been learning about and focused on business as my mission for many decades. But I worked in the conventional, traditional business world for 30 years, working at pharmaceutical and medical device companies. By training, I'm a pharmacist and Harvard MBA. So I followed kind of my dad's lead because he worked for a pharmaceutical company. And so I had more of a traditional kind of life with my faith and praying for people, and then my work separately until about 5 years ago. Yeah.
I remember on our first trip to South Africa, I remember your client, and one of the stories that stuck in my mind was you asked him, what do you want to do with your business? And he said, I want to double it. And you said, how often? I think he was thinking in his lifetime, and you were thinking every 6 months or every year. And that was kind of the clash of cultures of Silicon Valley and Cape Town back in 2003.
Interesting.
Interesting.
That hasn't changed much. I still believe big. God is big. We got to believe big.
That's right. So you trained as a pharmacist, got a Harvard MBA, worked in the healthcare industry, and have been working out this work-faith integration thing practically in your business life. And not just work-faith integration, but how do you bring the life of the Holy Spirit into a business? Now, take us on the journey about why you actually started your current company, and talk to us a little bit about that. So your dad, double PhD, and from what I understand, he wasn't the guy you went to chat about your emotions and who you were dating and what was happening, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Actually, I came to learn that emotions weren't really that welcome in my family. At least that was those were the beliefs I took from it, was that life was about performing and doing the right things and looking right and achieving. And so I invested pretty hard in doing all that. Part of that, I think, is just who I am. But, part of that is family values.
So you're more like your mom or your dad. What would you say?
I'm a combination of both. I am the kind of academic. I love research. I love science and math. I mean, and part of that may have been because that was the way to relate to the men in my family. You didn't relate through emotions or connection. You related through athletics and intellect. But I love those. I always have loved science and math. And so I came to realize that part of the reason I pursued pharmacy, I was also a very strong extrovert. And pharmacy looked like a way to use the science and math and have an extroverted type job. But my dad worked in the pharmaceutical industry. So we would talk at the dining room table about the biosynthetic pathway of norepinephrine. So, you know, it was a way for me to relate to him. And there weren't all that many ways other than playing basketball in the backyard and talking about science.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. And what did you chat with your mom about?
Well, I could talk more about emotions. Although there were limits. There were times when she would say, okay, it's time to get over that now and move on. But I talked to her about everything. I mean, I didn't get married till I was 48. So I think most people move to sharing with their spouse and their kids. And I still called my mom for a lot of my life.
Yeah.
And
then one day all of that changed. What happened, Susan?
Well, it changed gradually because my mother started slipping and not very far into the process, I would visit my parents. I lived a number of states away. And one day I took my mom on a walk outside of their place and she looks at me and says, "Who are you?"
Wow.
So she would fake it when other people were around and when Dad was saying we're going to pick up Susan. But when she was alone with me, she would realize she had no idea who I was. And she didn't believe that I was her daughter. And eventually she would fake it and say, well, tell me about yourself. She faked it pretty well. People didn't know that she didn't know who they were because she would come up and give them a big hug. But basically, I started looking for solutions because every time I was alone with my mom, she would say the same thing. So, I mean, that was pretty hard when I couldn't share with her anymore. I would call and she would say, "I don't know where I am. This is familiar. I think I've been here before." And, you know, she's sitting in her living room. So I started searching for solutions and I was a number of states away. So I wasn't her primary caregiver. My dad, who was in his late 80s at the time, was. And I was shocked at how few solutions our medical community has. In fact, we kind of ignore memory loss and even dementia. I've heard many physicians say they don't even try and diagnose it because it's just discouraging and they don't feel like they have any tools that really work. There are some drugs that are approved, but they don't do anything to change the trajectory of the cognitive decline. And so I prayed that God would show me the solution to memory loss, not just for my mom, but I'm like, my gosh, I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. And the number of people with memory loss is just ballooning as we get older. And my mom couldn't be left alone. If my dad was in the other room where she couldn't see him, she would panic. So it takes a full-time person to take care of someone, even with moderate memory loss, because they get to the point where they're a danger to themselves and others. So I'm like, how are there going to be enough people to take care of us all? So we really need a solution. And at the time, I think it's the biggest unmet need in medicine. And one of my advisors is from the healing rooms in Bethel. And he said they have tons of healings of cancer and they've even seen limbs grow back, but they have very few healings of neurodegenerative diseases. So I'm like, wow. So this is not solved in the spiritual realms or in the natural realms.
Wow.
And at the time, the pharmaceutical industry had a 99.8% failure rate trying to develop new products. So it's like, nobody's figured it out. I know God knows. I don't know, but God knows.
So the science was stacked against you. They were just saying, well, maybe you can keep it constant, but you're not going to reverse it. And this is not a fixable problem.
No
But
one
you
can
know, as a
keep it
believer,
constant.
God has answers, right? So then what happened? Actually, as you talk about this, I'm reminded of a movie I saw in the last couple of weeks it was an Australian movie called June Again. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't.
Yeah, you should check it out. Yeah, it's
Okay.
about a lady who is clearly in a care facility.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are coming and going. She doesn't know who they are. She doesn't know what's going on. And then she gets back to normal, but they tell her it's going to just be a short season. But she escapes from the home, gets a taxi, and goes back into her family to sort everybody out, sort out her business and everything. And a short while later, boom, she's back in the home. It's heartbreaking and heartening at the same time. It's worth checking out. Yeah. So tell us, what was the process you went on, Susan, including asking God, doing research with your background and so on? How did it come about, and what did you come up with?
Yeah. So I quit my job and mostly, I started spending like 5 hours a day in quiet time, mostly just spending time with the Lord, not even asking for a specific solution. And I went to a Christian conference and introduced myself as, I'm starting a company, trusting God to show me the solution to memory loss. And I had absolutely nothing, no idea what I was doing. And on the last day of the conference, I prayed all the time, God, I have no idea how to do this. Yeah. I have no idea. And I know there's thousands of scientists who've been trying to solve this for decades and aren't able to. So I know I can't do it in my strength. But I know you know the solution. Actually, the first thing I heard in my quiet times was that God has already created the solution for every disease, which certainly resonated with my spirit. I don't know about you, but I'm like, of course he has. He knew what diseases we were going to have. And so when I'm at this conference and I said, God, I need some sign that you're doing this. I have no idea what the sign would be, but I need some sign. And I left from praying that and went and met with a pharmacist from Canada who said, I came to this conference because 15 years ago, God showed me the solution to memory loss and dementia. And he told me to come to this conference because there's something I'm supposed to do with it.
Wow.
I'm like, would you think that's a sign? I'm like, thank you, God. Even I can figure out. It didn't take a lot of interpretation I'm like, I think that's a sign. He even used almost word for word the way I had described it. Yeah. Anyway, this pharmacist had used 2 supplements in his community practice and had adjusted the doses and said that he had seen over 100 people where he saw what he called dementia being reversed, where people were better. And his dad was 92 and was still in ministry full time and working full time. And it still took me a while to figure out where God was leading, because after 35 years of traditional Western medicine, I thought God was going to give me a pharmaceutical. And in fact, I prayed that God would give me something. A pharmaceutical takes $2.6 billion and 12 to 19 years to develop. So I prayed, well, God, can you give me, I don't want something 19 years from now. Can you give me something that at least can go into human clinicals right away? Yeah, because it takes $3 million in 3 years even to be able to put something in a human. Right. And it took me a while to realize, but everything God has led me to has been natural. Yeah. Which is not that unusual. A quarter of all prescription drugs are natural in their origin, and half of all oncology products. So using things God created to bring healing is not any new concept. Right. And then so I had other divine encounters. I told a pastor's wife what I was doing, and she said, well, I should introduce you to someone in my church who works in the pharma industry, but I don't go to her church. But the next day I was at a conference at her church. She introduces me to the gentleman, and he's had 2 prophetic words from Bobby Connor that there's an aquatic plant that is the cure for Alzheimer's, and someone's going to discover it. And it's going to heal millions of people, and it's going to be really incredible. He worked in manufacturing, so he had no idea what to do with these prophetic words.
Right.
And, but he had a passion for what I was doing. So we prayed together for an hour every week for many years after that. And I looked up in the scientific literature, aquatic plant and Alzheimer's. And there was one aquatic plant, Bacopa munieri, that had 289 studies. 9 of them are the highest level of evidence, placebo-controlled, double-blind human studies showing that it improved cognition. So I'm like, okay, I have those 2 supplements that the pharmacist from Canada found, and so I have 3 ingredients.
Yeah.
And basically, I read all of the scientific literature, started going to all the scientific conferences. That was the exact same thing I'd done in my 30-year career. Whenever I was working in a space, that's how you learn the products and learn what's going on. So it was slightly different, not being a pharmaceutical, but the process is the same. And I prayed through all of the ingredients that I found that had scientific evidence. And I studied their doses and studied their data and looked for which ones are safe and which ones had the most data. And then I prayed, Lord, do I include this one? Do I include this one? What doses? And so that was basically the process. It was completely a combination of the science and prayer and divine encounters.
And so the net result is that you've got several things, as I understand it. One is actual supplements or tablets that you can take. And then the other is programs, exercises, trainings, and so on. Is that, do I understand it correctly?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was kind of shocking to me, they start most of the scientific lectures saying there's nothing to delay, prevent, or reverse dementia.
Yeah.
They can't even stop the rate of decline. The drugs that are approved, your cognition is still declining. It just declines at a slightly slower rate on the drug than off. And once you stop the drug, it appears to go back because you don't make overall progress in the decline. So it's very popular, I guess, at these conferences to start out with this very powerful declaration. And you'll still hear this frequently. Neurologists, I've even talked to heads of Alzheimer's clinics who say, I've never helped a single person improve their memory. I'm thinking, well, why would you have a 35-year career doing that if you're not helping anybody?
Yeah.
But then they would start talking about the large lifestyle studies, the pointer study, the finger study. And having developed pharmaceuticals, I know how to think about how much effect you're getting from something. And one lifestyle change, I mean, many of them have like a 47% reduction in dementia. You can't get that level of effect from a pharmaceutical if you could find a pharmaceutical that worked. And the brain is the most complicated thing in all of creation. And there are lots of different things that feed into it. One scientist identified 36 different main causative mechanisms for dementia. So I think using one thing to address it is probably never going to work. And that's one of the challenges in the pharmaceutical space. You're trying to use one entity when you've got if you have a roof with 36 holes in it and the rain is coming in, plugging one hole isn't going to make much difference. You got to plug a lot of them. And
so a lifestyle change, could that be something like what you eat, exercise, et cetera, et cetera? Give us a couple of examples of a lifestyle change.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I have a proprietary formula. I call it my FAST formula, FASSTT. And those are the 6 main pillars of what we talk about. I mean, we certainly discuss other things. I call my training, it's maximize your memory. And F is for food. And we talk about what foods to eat, what foods not to eat, the level of processing, when to eat. But like berries, having one serving of berries once a week reduced cognitive age by 11 years.
Amazing, isn't it?
Everybody likes berries. I mean, who doesn't like berries? So that's there's some pretty simple things. Right. And some of the things work more once you've already got dementia and are pretty far progressed in the issues. Other things are better for prevention. Mm-hmm. And because my background is all the science, we actually look at a very high level that anyone can understand, the results of studies. So if the recommendation is to have berries, you know how many to have, and you have some idea whether it will help and whether it's more of a preventative or not. Exercise is huge. One study showed that 30 to 45-minute walk 3 times a week reduced dementia by 47%. Phew. That's really doable. This is not, you got to kill yourself and go to a gym. Yeah. Walking is fantastic, but it is, the more you do, the better. Yeah. So another study showed 10-minute walks. Yeah. They split people into segments, and the more exercise you do, the better. But exercise is huge. And we look at stress and sleep, your thoughts, your mind is powerful, taking captive every thought. Yeah. It's huge. What we think about and what we believe has a lot of power. We look at some pharmaceuticals that actually hinder your memory, and some that can hinder your sleep, and then your sleep can impact your memory. So basically, I didn't know, well, one, there's still a lot of the medical community that feels like this is a hopeless situation. And yet those who know what to do are saying that more than 95% of memory loss is preventable.
Wow.
But huge. Where do you find out what to do? I couldn't find a place to find that out. So that's why I created a course. There are a number of physicians now, lots of the functional. When I started doing this, there weren't as many people doing it. Now there's lots of functional medicine doctors that understand this and have protocols and things. But you get 15 minutes in your appointment, and it's probably $500 to $700. So my objective is to give you all the basics all in one place and make it easy. And then I'm praying for anything else God wants to give me that will help people.
Yeah, that's right. That's amazing. No, it's quite a fascinating thing. I think I read a study a while ago, something about dancing also.
Oh, dancing's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah. Music is great. Music, it picks up on a part of our brain that's not just the logic. And you have to be thinking to dance. Dancing is very athletic. It's great exercise. It's social. It's upbeat. Dancing's wonderful.
Many years ago, Lynn's mom actually, when they both worked, Lynn and her mom worked for Creative Memories, which was the photograph album products. They created, and it was Lynn's mom's instigation, photograph albums so that you could sit with people. I guess they had a study around the evening hours. There was a bad time in the evening. And just sitting with somebody and going over the same photographs again and again and again made a difference. And they, once a year, they published like this purple album and then gave all the proceeds into dealing with Alzheimer's and so on.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So ideally, we don't want to progress to the point that we have dementia, but even those with dementia, one of the best things you can do is elicit emotion, do things that they connect with, music they know from the past, pictures of their family, pictures of memorable occasions. And that really, because oftentimes, and you're right, the evenings are worse. They call it sundowners. For almost anyone with any level of memory loss, the evenings tend to be worse than the mornings. And there's lots of things that you can do like that that are enjoyable and that really help the person. One thing that I found that most people don't know is that the pathology that leads to memory loss starts 20 to 40 years before our first memory loss symptom. So it's starting in our 40s and 50s. And in fact, they've even shown now things that you do in school age that impacts your likelihood of getting dementia later. So what I'm trying to encourage people to do is to start now. I mean, your brain is the most important thing you have. It's the control center for everything in your life. When you've watched people that have memory loss, it's just horrible. It's the worst thing that can happen to you. So we want to do everything we can to avoid it. My mother's friends actually told me they prayed that she would pass because when she was in the memory ward, it was terrible. I mean, she ended up in bed and not able to get out of bed. They had to use a crane to use a bedpan. I mean, two people to wipe your family. It's a very humiliating. So anything where you're praying that you would pass rather than having it, it's pretty bad. You want to avoid it, and you can avoid it, but we need to start early. And most people by their 60s have noticed some ways their memory's not as good. At least in our culture. There's cultures that don't have memory loss like that have healthier lifestyles. But there's actually a lot that you can do. There is hope, and people get discouraged when they talk to their physician who doesn't have hope, but there is hope, and there's a lot that you can do.
So if we break up our audience and say, okay, what are you going to say to people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s? Let's start with the people in their 40s. What advice would you give them?
Well, it's the same kind of advice. It's adopting brain healthy lifestyles and adopting them early, and having a culture of it is the best. So if you grow up in a family that understands, so your brain is an organ and it's connected to the rest of your body. And so the things that are healthy for your brain, I mean, we focus on what has scientific evidence that it helps your brain, but those things help your heart, they help your blood vessel, it helps. And in fact, all of the risk factors for memory loss are all of these other chronic conditions: diabetes, hypertension, depression, sleep apnea. So the things that you adopt as a brain healthy lifestyle are healthy in other ways too. And if you grow up in a family that is incorporating that and you learn to eat that way, then you'll raise your kids that way. And we could have a society that doesn't have the levels of memory loss and dementia that we currently have. But because the rates of these chronic ongoing diseases like diabetes and hypertension and heart disease are so common in our society, those are part of the reasons that the memory loss is so common, because those are big risk factors for getting memory loss.
Susan, have you looked at the connection between rest and Sabbath and the health of your mind? And what have you come up with there?
That's such a great topic. I mean, that's one I'm very much trying to learn more about myself.
Because I mean, we both lived in Silicon Valley for over 30 years, and there was what I think a guy from a Stanford professor called it the new economy pathology, where you're supposed to be on 24/7, always connected, and you got to pretend like you're enjoying it, and there's not much time for rest. And I'm imagining that in the long term wreaks havoc with your mind. You think, oh, I'm being alert, I'm being productive, but the absence of rest and Sabbath must be wrecking our minds, I would imagine.
Totally. And in fact, that is one of the pillars. Stress is one of the S's. And I totally agree. I mean, I used to work 100-hour weeks. I didn't get enough sleep. I mean, and I thought that was, people would brag about it at work. Well, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night, and I'm working so hard. It is so unhealthy, and yet our culture kind of condones it. And so definitely rest is important. getting deep sleep is important. Learning techniques for relaxation so that you actually are, you have your two systems, your fight or flight and your calm, and you can actually do things to stimulate your parasympathetic system, your calm system. And it's really important to have habits like that where you are practicing just taking a few minutes. But I'm also trying to learn, how do you function from a place of rest? It doesn't mean we're not functioning or that we're not achieving. God's designed us to do things. And we are Jesus with skin on to people here. And we want to be able to make a difference, and that requires work and effort. So we're not saying don't exert any effort, but how do you do it? How do you pay attention to your body, pay attention to your own signals, and take care of yourself while you're achieving, and be able to function where it's not stressing you and draining you.
Yeah.
And what you're doing makes a difference too. If you're doing things you have a passion for, and if you're doing things that are making a difference, it's, I think it's a lot more rewarding. Purpose is huge as well. Having a purpose makes a big difference in how you feel about your days.
Yeah.
So,
I remember in Johannesburg, I saw a bumper sticker that said, "The meek may inherit the earth, but only what's left by those who hustle." It's that kind of mindset. And
totally.
a lot of Christians adopt that same view versus learning to work from a place. That's a key indicator. Somebody's in the kingdom when they can work from a place of rest, even fight from sitting down when you're fighting your spiritual battles. So I think that's really, really important. And so I like that. Plus, of course, as you know, in dealing with companies and individuals, we've talked a lot about purpose for over 20 years. And I mean, the world is waking up to it. But if people can align their calling with their career and have a meaningful purpose in what they do, it can. I'm glad that it's going to solve memory problems and so forth as well. It's I was speaking to a guy and I asked him to review one of my books, and he said, "Brett, I read one book a year, so basically I'm not going to review your book." And I thought, my mom went to the doctor with a problem with her eyes, and it turns out she was reading 2 to 3 books a week. He said, you just got to slow down. This is at 94 years old.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Good for her. That keeps your brain good.
Yeah, it does keep your brain very, very good. No, but I love the idea of purpose plus the idea of rest. And so the healthy lifestyle things, it seems part of what you're saying is you almost going to reap what you sow to some degree. I'm sure that there's exceptional circumstances, but there's a sowing and reaping.
Yes.
And living a kingdom-focused life where you're doing what you're passionate about. You're working from a place of rest. You're not striving and stressing. I remember once I was on my way to the dentist in Silicon Valley, and my tax lady called me and said, "Brett, you have to write a big check to the IRS." So I went to get my teeth cleaned or whatever it was. But on the way home, I thought, well, I should probably start worrying about that now. And right away, God said to me, "You don't have a right to worry." Yeah. And so it's an interesting thing, just training one's mind to live out the practical things of the faith. And it's good to hear, Susan, that these have good benefits for the mind.
Totally. Yeah. Worry doesn't add a single hour to our day, right? I mean, it's all there in the scripture, but walking it out is another matter, especially in our culture with its own pressures.
So, Susan, at Vivolor, you've got some products that are useful and people can take these as supplement. What sort of results have you been seeing? I'm not asking for a definitive scientific thing, but this is part of your background. Give us some stories of what you're seeing.
Yeah, so we've seen improvements for people who have normal memory, and we encourage people to start early and invest in your memory. Vivolor Memory Support has lots of nutrients in it. It's essentially a mega supplement. So it's giving you 5 to 20 times more just raw ingredients than any other supplement. And then they're the ones with the most scientific evidence. So we've seen people with normal memory, people with mild memory slippage, and even people with dementia and advanced Alzheimer's benefit. So Mary Tamsen's a teacher who is in her 60s, and after a few months on the product, she said that she learned the names of her 72 students by the third day of school, which was the best she'd done in her 28-year career. And Jan uses it. She's a writer, and she says that she writes better. We've had a few people with ADHD who said it helps clear brain fog and helps improve concentration and focus. We've had a number of people who had observed issues and got better. One is a professional speaker, and you lose confidence when you're having trouble coming up with words, which is a common early memory loss issue. And he was much better, improved his confidence. One customer, Dr. Richard Johnson, wrote 3 books about the product. He's not part of the company, not paid by us. He just felt like he had such benefits that he wanted to write these books. And the first book is about the science behind it. It's My Memory is Eroding, 10 Reasons I Decided to Start Vivolor Memory Support. And he said, from the scientific evidence, you would expect this to benefit a lot of additional things beyond just memory. It should help mood, it should help heart disease. And he had issues with all these things. It should, he had cancer, and there was data in the cancer space. And then he kept a journal his first 30 days and was noticing improvements right away, but was like, could this possibly be Vivolor? And his third book is I Feel 15 Years Younger. 50 ways my life was measurably enhanced by Vivolor Memory Support. He'd been on Vivolor for a year at that point. I didn't even know there were 50 aspects of life to measure. He's very aware. He's a behavioral psychologist and gerontologist. Anyway, he goes through all 50 areas. Here's what was going on for me beforehand, and here's after Vivolor. And he even gives them numbers. So that kind of helps you to get an idea of what types of areas might improve. But we see most people with improved energy. And mood is a big one. We also have some folks that had severe memory loss. So Gene had advanced Alzheimer's. He had stage 7 Alzheimer's. That's the most severe you can get. And he'd had it for years. Slept all day, hadn't talked in 3 years, didn't know his wife's name, couldn't take care of himself. They even had to take away his precious poodle, Chanel. And after a month on Vivolor, he actually started talking after the first few days and started calling his wife by name, which he hadn't done in a year. He wasn't real coherent when he first started talking, but by the end of just 1 month, he was talking. He could eat by himself, simple foods. He could go to the bathroom by himself. He was up doing things, and they even gave him his dog back. So he had his life back. And Claire was in a memory ward, and she also was just sleeping all day. Again, a pretty advanced case. And on Vivolor Memory Support, she wanted to do the activities in the memory ward and was just more engaged and had a better quality of life. So it's helped a variety of people. We have testimonials on the website. That's what's really rewarding for me, is when people tell me, I was discouraged one day and praying, I'm doing startups has its ups and downs always. And I'm like, okay, Lord, is this the right thing? I mean, is this I wanted the solution to memory loss. And in the middle of praying, this customer called me that I had never talked to. I was on a God TV, on a TV show, and she had seen me on that and had been ordering the product. And she called and said, I remember my OBGYN's name that delivered my babies. And she was in her 80s. I remember our neighbors when I was 5. I'm remembering all this stuff that I couldn't remember before. Wow. So, you know, God has a way of knowing how to bring those encouragements. And that's what it's all about, is making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. So when I listen to your story, Susan, I think about 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4, where it says that we're to comfort others with the comfort wherewith we've been comforted. And you went through that. I mean, a huge tragedy with your mom, but out of that, seeking God and finding an answer. What principles would you give people or learnings about, okay, you've got an issue, it seems insurmountable. The science, quote unquote, says this is an impossible problem. What advice would you give people? And it could be a completely different issue they're tackling.
Yeah, totally.
How did you encourage yourself on that process?
Yeah, well, I think just believing and knowing that all things are possible with God, and spending time with him and getting direction on a regular basis. I started making decisions a little bit differently, with just praying about them and not doing a lot of the due diligence that I would have done in my 30-year business career. And I made mistakes. And so I've come to realize to combine both of them, to still do the diligence and some of the things that I would do in the natural, and to seek the Lord and ask for his direction. But it is a different kind of balance, because my work before was I didn't honestly in my career pray about everything that I was doing, and that's what I try to do now. I think having a good support group and prayer support is really important as well. I do think this is a season where God is calling entrepreneurs and where he is sharing his secrets with his children. And we all have learned things in our lives from the things that we've gone through. And whether it's how to have a good marriage or how to handle a divorce or what to do, I mean, anything that we've been through where we've experienced healing and God has showed us some secrets about it, I think it's an incredible opportunity to share with other people. Even if you don't do it as a full-time job, now with our technology, you can do podcasts and things like you're doing, because we do encourage others in the places that we have been comforted. And we can minister to people that have a completely different lifestyle and set of experiences than we do. But I think there's a depth in which we can minister to those who have a similar life experience that can be really powerful. So, and that's another thing I have a heart for is helping Christian entrepreneurs. I don't know at what stage that comes in the vision, but I think we should all be out there sharing what we're learning and making a difference in the world for others, because the world needs us, and we have light just by having the Lord in us.
Yes. Yeah, I've been encouraged over the years, probably the last 15 years or so, to see people ask God for products and he gives them to them. And the revelation comes in different ways. And sometimes not all Christians can handle it. I remember speaking at a conference while I was the guest speaker at a Christian marketplace meeting. And I talked about how God had given revelation about products. And afterwards, the speaker said to me, the coordinator said, Brett, I wish you had said that guy went into the research library, did the research 12 hours a day, and didn't say that God gave him a formula for something. and it's this clash of cultures, the Christian versus kingdom. But more and more we see people with the lovely combination of research plus revelation and how those things combine. And so it's been great to see that, Susan, in what you're doing. So you're taking your learning.
About giving God the glory, and I think His name will be glorified, just like you said with the other products. That even though that gentleman wasn't ready to receive that or accept that at the time, it plants a seed.
Yeah.
And if he runs into a couple of other people with similar experiences,
right,
we're planting seeds. We may not see the harvest, but that still was a testimony of God's goodness.
Right. I have another friend who was a missionary in Central America, and they ran into the flesh-eating bacteria issue. So people would come in. She was a nurse, so she had a little clinic, but they would see this popping up. And so she began to ask God, same sort of process, in a combination of essential oils. She came up with something that worked. I mean, it worked out in the bush. And so her husband got it twice, and he was cured. Yeah. So now, of course, in the US, she would have to go through, the multi-million-dollar FDA cut ads. So it's not going to happen. But God's given the solution, and it's good to see that there's many more of these things out there. So, Susan, as we start to wrap this thing up over here, I mean, what I love about your story is, of course, what you're doing is super focused around purpose, which is wonderful. You've got a product and you've got learning methods and so forth that support that. And you're not stopping with the memory loss thing. You're saying, okay, God, give me, okay, I've learned how to solve this problem. Now, what else is out there? And I love that about your story, because it's not the end game. It's okay, if we can do this with memory loss, we could do this with something else. And so I'm keen to see what you come up with next.
Yeah, I actually started Prophetic Teams, which is modeled after Dan McCullum, who with Chris Valentin teaches the School of the Prophets at Bethel. He has done this and has a book about it. And he did it for cold cases with the police. And he would have a group of different prophetic teams. And when the police had no idea where to go on a murder or high visibility case, the prophetic teams would come up with solutions. So I have a group and I give them very vague information where they can not possibly in the natural say anything about it. And they come up with verses and start talking, and it's incredibly encouraging. And we hope to do that for additional solutions to other conditions and diseases as well in the future. I also use it for company decisions and strategic direction for feedback. So it's a new business model.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. If you're running a kingdom business, I was reminded as you were talking earlier, you've got to have spiritual capital. But the gifts of the Spirit, discernment, word of knowledge, word of wisdom, and so on, are for everyday business life, not just for something that happens in a church meeting. And so it's good to see you deploying the gifts of the Spirit in business strategy, product development, research, and so forth. And I remember speaking with the head of a major genomics company in the Bay Area years ago. And I asked him, what percentage of what you do is inspiration and what percent is intellect? He said, it's 90% inspiration. He said,
wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't think I'm there yet. That's great.
Yeah. No, he said, And now he had 1,000 employees. I'm sure they all thought it was biosciences and so on, but he was a primary product guy. Reminded me also a little bit about Don Cyphers. You might remember him from Xerox PARC. And I think he had 150 something patents to his name. And he said about 35 of them just came in dreams. So you just get a dream, you'd wake up, write it down, and there was another patent. Look, I'm sure there's a bit more work to it than that. But God's lovely inspiration for new products.
You know, one of my heroes is George Washington Carver, who I don't know if you're familiar with the story. And he was a peanut farmer. He was actually a professor at a university, but peanuts were kind of the new thing. And he used to spend an hour a day walking in the gardens, praying with the Lord.
Yeah.
And he asked God to teach him the secrets of the universe.
Yeah.
And after a while, God said to him, you couldn't handle them.
Yeah.
Ask me for the secret to the peanut. And he came up with 500 inventions on the peanut, including peanut butter, all inspiration from the Lord, because he knew how to get quiet and hear from the Lord. So, yeah.
That was a fascinating story, and I love it. And then him going around and empowering small peanut farmers on how to do better things. And from what I understand, the only book that he had in his lab was the Bible. And amazing story. Yeah. So I was just chatting with somebody else about him recently and challenging her because she works in a particular commodity. I said, well, if George Washington Carver can do hundreds of products, you've got quite a few more to go. So that's
that's right. That's right. And Vivolor does too.
Yes. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story.
Thank you, Brett. Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
It's been wonderful. I remember well our first trip with you to Cape Town. In fact, one of the things I was thinking about today, which you should have known better with your pharmaceutical background, but you might recall there was one time when we were going along in one of those VW vans and something was challenging you, and Lynn said to you, are you taking malaria meds?
Oh, yes, I remember. Yes.
The pharmacist.
They wreaked some havoc, yes.
It was getting wrecked by malaria meds. I remember that. Yeah. That's right. No, but that was a wonderful trip, and it was great to have you as part of that very first team. And next year we're coming up for 20 years, and so it's good to see you going strong and making a difference in the world. So Susan, thanks for your time. How can people find out about you? Where can they access the products? Where do you recommend they go?
Yes, Vivolor.com, Vivolor.com is the website. That's where we have Vivolor Memory Support. It's, again, a mega supplement. Actually, the name of the company has meaning too. Vivo is living, and Lore is from Lord. So it's literally Living Lord Therapeutics. It's his company. I initially prayed and said, it's your company. What do you want me to do? And then I realized, I'm not a servant. I'm a daughter. And so I say, well, now what are we going to do each day? So Vivolor, Vivolor.com. And there's another website, memorywellnessacademy.com, that has the Maximize Your Memory Challenge and the lifestyle education. And I'm just starting a new branch where we're offering education on cognitive optimization to employers, to companies. If they have a group of employees, do all employee presentation on the top 3 things you can do to improve cognition, and then do 3-month coaching with folks to actually move them to those new lifestyles. So that's a new effort. But the 2 websites, memorywellnessacademy.com and Vivolor.com. Thank you, Brett, for all that you're doing and all that you've given over those 20 years. And I know it hasn't always been easy. It never is. And I just want to thank you for being a mentor to me and for all the people that you've taught and the businesses that you're helping to coach and encourage. You're an amazing man, amazing talents. And I thank you for what you've done in my life and in others.